after Muslims are Mexicans. And he didn't say anything about Asians or Vietnamese. And then I told him that once a government starts going after one or two groups, it doesn't stop there. Basically, everyone who is others may eventually become the target. And that is the reason why all of us are here today. I know that some of you probably have valid concerns about your own safety or your loved one's safety. And I also understand that we want to try to figure out the potential impact of the Trump presidency on our economics and also on our status in our society. We want to know would Trump immigration policies affect more than 1 million Vietnamese American and 16,000 Vietnamese students currently studying in the US. We want to know if a Trump's America offer any job opportunities for students who came here and invested so much in their study. So it is my honor today to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Jeffrey White. Jeff is an accomplished and prominent attorney in Boston. He has risen to leadership positions in both government and private sector. Before working for his current law firm, Devon Dana, he was the commissioner of the Department of Telecommunications and Cable in Massachusetts. He is also a leader in numerous community organizations and associations, just to name a few, such as I understand that you are a member of the Asian Community Development Corporation. You also served in the board of Asian American Lawyers Association of Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Jeffrey White. Jeff, thank you so much for speaking with us today. So my first question for you is, in what ways do you think that the Trump presidency...
Well, let's sit out front of the table. Are we being, is this okay for your recording, or?
Yes, it's good.
Okay. Let's sit out here so I can look at everybody. So yeah, what's your first question?
So my first question is, in what ways do you think that the Trump presidency will affect international students?
So how is it going to affect international students? So, I was thinking about, what does this Trump presidency mean? And so first of all, we sort of have to look at the facts, right? Let's look at sort of what's really happening and sort of what's happening to Asian Americans after and during this whole campaign season. So one of the things I read pretty recently, a very prominent Asian American attorney here in Boston, a guy named Bill Lee. He's a partner at a very prominent law firm here in the city, and he's really well known. He's probably known as one of the best litigators in the whole country. He lives in Wellesley, Massachusetts. You guys all know where Wellesley is? Yeah, really nice neighborhood, right? Really nice place to live. He went to Harvard himself, Cornell Law School, so really great credentials. He's a managing partner at his law firm of 1,000 attorneys. So this guy is very accomplished. So he was in Wellesley getting gas. He drives, no surprise, he drives a Mercedes SUV, and he's filling up his gas tank. The guy next to him says to him, "Where'd you get that car?" He's in a suit, he looks nice, and the guy pumping gas next to him, "Where'd you get that car?" And then he's like, "Well, I got it at Herb Chambers, like where you buy cars at," right? And then the guy, White, says to him, "Why don't you just go back home to China?" Right? Now, these are the facts that we are seeing. This happened to Bill, I believe, sometime in the late summer, early fall. But the tone of this campaign, I think, has made us all very aware of sort of hate speech, us being, I think, this great comment you made, which is otherness, right? We feel other. Now, did any of you guys read in the New York Times in October? There was this great article. So one of the editors of the Times who lives in Brooklyn. He's pushing his baby carriage with his family, walking the streets of Brooklyn, and somehow he got jostled or bumped, and this white woman said to him, "Why don't you just go back to China?" And he wrote this editorial in the New York Times about how that made him feel, right? Here's a guy, again, another prominent person, an editor of the New York Times, and someone tells him, "Go back to China." So he wrote an editorial about how it made him feel, and shockingly, there was a huge amount of responses. This is New York City. This is not Oklahoma. This is not Texas. This is not Utah. This is New York City. How many of you guys been to New York City? Everyone, raise your hand. Who's been to New York City? How diverse is New York City? Lots of Asian people in New York City, right? Lots of African American people in New York City. A lot of Latinos in New York City. In New York City, people feel emboldened to say, "Go back to China" or "Go back to wherever you're from." I can only imagine how you feel if you were a much smaller minority group. Anyways, back to the story about the editor from the New York Times. So he wrote this editorial, and lots and lots of responses came. And you guys should see it. They collected these responses, and they filmed all these videos. It was about 30 minutes of videos of everyone talking about the Asian Americans talking about their own experiences of hate speech, feeling like other. And it was, I watched it. I have two younger sons. I have two sons. One's 16 and one's 11. And, we decided to watch these videos as a family to sort of feel like where is this coming from? How do we all feel about this? We talked about it as a family about sort of, the otherness and how do we react? So the question was, as international students, so how many of you are international students and how many of you guys, so almost all of you guys are international students. And so has anyone ever said to you, go back to China or go back to Vietnam or go back to wherever it is that they believe you're from? Because that's the other thing. Yeah. I remember when I was in grammar school, a kid came up to me, I'm Chinese American, and says, "You are a Jap." And you're right? I had no idea, what's he talking about? In our household, we are very identified as Chinese Americans, but, it's funny, they all make a sense. They don't even know where you're from, right? They say, go back to wherever they believe you are from. So how many of you heard those comments? You've heard it? You've heard, go back to wherever and I was actually, you guys really should go to this Times article. It's I think the title of the video was it's 2016, meaning it's 2016. Can we believe that people have these racist attitudes still? So what I fear, so these are facts. We want to start out with the facts. And we know. So Bill Lee, prominent attorney, living in Wellesley, someone tells him to go back to China. But you know what? The story doesn't end there. So Bill leaves the gas station in his fancy, Mercedes-Benz SUV, and the guy follows him, right? How threatening is that? Right? So he's worried, and so he finally drives to the police station to feel like I need to be someplace more safe. It is funny. There have been 2 or 3 instances in the last 3 weeks that I've been very conscious of my race. I feel so my sons go to, one of my sons goes to middle school in Harvard Square, the other goes to school in Belmont. And, I'm in Harvard Square all the time. How diverse is Harvard Square? We see Asian people in Harvard Square all the time, right? Who sees Asian people in Harvard Square? Right? There are lots of Asian people in Harvard, right? We feel like it's a pretty diverse place. I feel usually, if you asked me this question maybe a year ago, I feel I just walked through Harvard sort of almost anonymously, right? I don't feel like I stick out. But recently, in the last 2-3 weeks after this election, I feel very conscious, right? I remember in traffic, someone cut me off, and there's this angry, a different kind of angry look. There was an angry look that you are Asian and you cut me off, or I cut you off, or so there was there was something more notable. So let's get back to the question of, what do you all do as international students? But so with this whole change that's happening. So one thing I was thinking about, so I worked for the governor of Massachusetts, Paul Patrick. He left office in 2014. And he was asked this very question right after he was asked this very question right after, like what should we do with Donald Trump becoming president? And I think he gave a pretty sensible first answer. And I think the President Obama gave a very sensible answer. The first answers, they said, first of all, we have to respect the results of elections. As you guys know, as international students, the rule of law is not something we can all take for granted. And one thing, we all love about the United States. So how many of you guys said are not international students? Who's anyone here?
Probably not the international student.
You're not an international student, okay. But the rest of you grew up somewhere else and are here just for school, is that? Or you came here for school, right? Mm-hmm. So the rule of law is a really important bit about being an American. And I think what I would say is, we have to respect election results. And that's what Governor Patrick said in an interview, and that's what President Obama said in her interview. The second thing, not only do you respect election results, you respect the office of the presidency, right? What we all know in the United States, and this is not taken, this is something we don't take for granted in everywhere in the world, which is smooth and non-violent transitions of government. For 200 plus years, we have had elections and there's been transitions of government. Again, talking about my sons, my older son is in AP U.S. history. So I'm relearning U.S. history again, and we're talking about George Washington, and it was presented, George Washington, I said one of the biggest things that happened in American political history is that George Washington decided, I'm only going to serve 2 terms. So come on in, join us. One of the most really remarkable things, people loved George Washington after the Revolutionary War. And it was, people wanted him to stay for more than 2 terms. And he said, you know what? We in the United States need to be different. We just left a king. We left sort of dictatorship. I'm only going to serve 2 terms. And that 2 term has had only one exception with FDR during World War II, and that was an exceptional time. But my point really to you guys is, how important a peaceful transition of government is. It's not something that we all should take for granted, but it is an important bit here in the United States. So those are 2 things that we need to think about, right? So first of all, we respect election, right, results. Elections happen. If we don't believe elections are fair, there's process, right? Right now, they're doing some recounts in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, so there's process. And that's another important piece of American history is that, or American culture, let's just say, is that there is real process, right? And in the United States, there's legal processes. If there's something that's not working, we go through process, and we respect that legal process. Because we understand that there shouldn't be corruption. And then the other piece I said, we respect the office of the president because the people voted for it. However, what does this mean? What does this mean also when we balance the other rights that we have in the Constitution? Does that mean whatever President Trump says, we just are agreeable to? Do we just remain silent as if things happen that we are not happy with? So, the thing that happened to Bill Lee, as I said, happened in August or September. I can't remember exactly the date it happened. But he didn't come forward about this story until really after the election because his colleagues at the firm said, you need to talk rights. So that's one wonderful thing here about the United States too, freedom of speech. That we can and we should never be silenced if something has been wrong to us. Even as immigrants, even as students coming in as international students, you guys can speak up. You're here in the United States, right? These are the things that are recognized by our culture, that you have voices, we all have voices to speak. And when we see something is wrong, we can speak up. Speaking up doesn't mean to be disrespectful. As I said, we respect election results and we respect the offices of the presidency, but we do voice when we see something that's wrong. What else do we do? I think that's one of the biggest things that we can do, right? Is raise our hand, just like Bill did. Go to the newspapers, tell them your story, because it is important for people to know. And if we don't know what's going on, it's a problem. So interestingly, I also worked at the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, where I did consumer protection and antitrust work. And the current Attorney General, Laura Healy, here in Massachusetts, really, because she had been hearing about some of these problems about hate speech surrounding the election, she decided to have a special hotline at the AG's office for people. If you had some issues about hate speech or discrimination, give a call. And interestingly, in the first 3 days, they got 300 phone calls to the Attorney General's office about people complaining about hate speech, discrimination because of this whole post-election stuff. I think in the first week, they got over 500 calls. So obviously something is going on, right? And so what can we do again? We need to speak up. If you see something wrong, you need to tell people. By calling the Attorney General's office, those numbers start becoming meaningful. So if only one person calls, it's like, oh, one person calls. But if something happens to you, you need to tell the world what's going on. We are witnesses to history. That's another thing I've been talking to my sons about, is that we are witnesses to history. We are participants in history. We are living history. And so it doesn't mean that we should be innocent bystanders to this arena of history. So I think those are so one, thinking about the facts, right? What has happened? And two, thinking about, hey, welcome, come on in. And second, to think about what we can do. And I think what I've said is we need to make our voices heard. Does anyone have questions about any of that I just spoke about? Make some sense to all of you?
So to the point that people should call the hate the hate crime hotline.
Yeah.
And also should go to the newspapers and speak up. Are there any tactics that you recommend that students, especially foreign students, should use?
So let's first think about, there was a third thing I thought about that I forgot to share, which is another good thing to do is what you guys are doing right now. Getting together, sharing, right? Because if you have an experience that's alone, you feel like I'm the only one experiencing this. But by you guys coming together and talking to each other or hearing from someone to speak about it, I think it's also a really powerful thing, right? I think numbers are powerful. I think you guys should gather regularly and talk about what's happening in your schools, what's happening in your communities, and what's happening with your friends. And I think supporting each other, talking to each other, that's also very helpful and healthy. And I think sometimes we don't think about those sort of things. But so what sort of tactics? So I think simple things, as we just talked about, just picking up the phone and making a report when something has happened to you is important, because it leads to the growing number of what's happening. Because at the end of the day, data is important. We live in, like, you're with the video camera, data and everything that we do is all being collected, and data is important. So when I was at the department, I would always ask my attorneys and my economists. I was like, what's the data that is supporting the conclusion that we're coming to? So could we say that there is a hate crime problem in the United States post Donald Trump? We can't say anything until we have data, right? We can't make conclusions until we have data. So by you standing up and saying something has happened to me adds to that data so we can, government officials can, and others can, make conclusions about what's going on. If you remain silent, there is no data, right? There is nothing anyone can do. So it's important to step forward when things have happened to you. That's why I think that New York Times article was very powerful for me. Was, I felt many of the things that people shared in those videos, and I was like, and it was important for me to show my sons. And I think it was empowering to, like, we can say those things too. Those feelings that we have are not individual, and we should not suffer alone.
So a lot of students are worried not about Donald Trump, but also about the potential immigration policies. Do you foresee any adverse immigration policies against legal, like students who came here legally to study?
So legal students. Yeah. So, I think it's a real problem when we don't embrace immigration, right? I think, I know, are all of you Vietnamese or come from Southeast Asia? How many of you do not come from Southeast Asia? No one. And you're all sort of from Vietnam, but could be ethnically a lot of different ethnic groups, but from Vietnam. Everyone's from Vietnam. So maybe the first thing I want to talk about. So first of all, I am not an immigration attorney. So I don't study immigration law and the different nuances that are happening. So I don't want to opine about sort of what student visas are going to, how those things are going to change. But what I can do is talk about sort of this history of immigration and sort of how should you guys feel about immigration, right? So the first thing is the history of Vietnamese immigration to the United States. It's a pretty recent history. In 1980, how many Vietnamese were living in the United States? Does anyone know? How many Vietnamese people were living in the United States in 1980? How many?
3 million.
3 million. Anyone have another? Three. That's a good guess. That's a good guess.
Something like 100,000.
Like 100,000. Anyone else have a guess? What? You know, ask Google. See? How many do you think? So we got 3 million. We have 100,000.
And some 100,000.
Some 100,000. What do you say?
Less than 100,000.
Less than 100,000. Actually, in 1980, it was 200,000 Vietnamese in the United States. In 2010, what's the number? 3 million? 1.2 million? Anyone else? One more guess? I like 3 for some reason. 3 guesses are good. What? 2 million? The number is 1.5 million. You said 2 million?
I said 3.
Oh, you said 3. You said 1 million.
I said 1.2.
You said 1.2 million. Okay. So, look, there is substantial growth, but it is a new and emerging population. So I'm Chinese American. Chinese started coming to the United States in the 1840s, around the gold rush. Do you guys know about the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882? Who knows about the Chinese Exclusion Act? Does anyone know? You do. Tell us what do you know about the Chinese Exclusion Act?
Okay, I just know
Just generally, like give me 2 sentences what you know about the Chinese.
Yeah, so during the gold rush in California, and a lot of Chinese came to the US to go and did other jobs like maybe in laundromat or something.
Laundry, absolutely.
So because there were so many Chinese coming, and the US government issued some kind of law, passed a law to limit the number of Chinese who came.
Absolutely, absolutely. Good. That's a perfect summary. So 1882, the U.S. government passed a law the Chinese Exclusion Act that said there were only 4 categories of people that could come to the United States that were of Chinese descent. 1, you could come as a student. 2, you could come as a diplomat. 3, you could come as a visitor, right, just coming to visit. And 4, you could come in if you were a business person. So if you had a business and had an established business, you could come to the United States. What a limitation, right? And because of that number, I should have had this data. I used to have this data in my head. But I think the population of Chinese in the United States stayed the same without much variation. It was about 1 million in 1882 and did not change until 1950, about when the Exclusion Act was repealed. That's what negative laws on immigration can do to specific countries and to people. You could really limit what can happen. So that's where you guys also can be very vigilant about. Speak up when you see the laws impacting you disproportionately. So if there's laws that say, you know, Vietnamese should be limited to come to the United States to study, you need to advocate. You need to speak up and make sure people understand what that does. So what it did for Chinese Americans, it stabilized the population, right? There was no Chinese American growth for nearly 70 years. That's shocking, isn't it? Yes, Chinese growth has really exploded since the Exclusion Act has been repealed, but you could only imagine what Chinese and Asians would look like in the United States if there was no Chinese Exclusion Act. Think about if there was no Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, that we wouldn't be Chinese, that is. You know, we wouldn't be these 4%, 5%, you know, minority population in the United States, right? Chinese wanted to come to the U.S. They wanted to work here. So be watchful. Make sure you are, you know, seeing what laws are being passed and see how it impacts you disproportionately, and make sure you don't speak to the paper, you reach out, talk to each other. You know, Mai's going to become a lawyer soon, and you know, lawyers are really important in our society because they advocate for groups of people.
So I have this question for you. You talk about being a minority in a society, and you work for both government and the private sector, and you have risen to leadership positions in both. So have you ever faced discrimination as a minority?
Never.
How did you
Never.
overcome?
So let me tell you about, so I was at a very large law firm until just very recently. I was at a 500-person law firm, now at a 150-person law firm. So when I was at the 500-person law firm, in my first couple of weeks there, I was a partner there. I was, one day I was, it was like my second week there. And another one of our a new partner had just arrived, and a couple people came to my office and said, oh, you should go and let's go meet the new partner that just arrived at the office. So I came up, and you know, I was dressed in a suit, and I looked like a lawyer, right? I looked like a lawyer. And one of the guys was walking with me, and then a partner at the firm pulled out his iPhone. And he goes to me, I can't get my iPhone working. Can you help me with my iPhone? I'm like, oh, I'm a helpful guy. So he's like, I can't get my emails out from my iPhone. Can you help me? Well, let me take a look. So I looked at his iPhone and I tried to do something and I couldn't get it fixed, right? I'm a lawyer, I'm not an IT person. But then I realized that he actually thought I was the IT guy because I'm Asian. He didn't think I was a partner at the firm. He didn't think of me as a colleague. He thought of me as an IT guy because he made this horrible stereotypical assumption. Because in my law firm, how many of 500 attorneys, how many Asian American partners are there? One?
Not many.
Not many. Not many. Not many. In my office, there were 250 people here in our Boston office, attorneys, me and another guy were the only partners that were Asian Americans. So, it's interesting. There were probably more Asian American IT guys than there were partners at the firm. Where the IT department had probably 10 people, and there's 250 lawyers. So, yes. So, of course, we are discriminated against because there's all these horrible assumptions about us. Let me give you some facts. How many Asian American CEOs are there in Fortune 500 companies in the United States?
Less than 10.
Less than 10? Fortune 500 companies, right?
I can only think of one, the CEO of Pepsi.
Yes, she's Indian, isn't she?
Yeah, she's Indian.
Yep. So you say one, you say less than 10.
CEO of Microsoft.
Yeah, that's right. The CEO of Microsoft, he's Indian. Anyone else? Any other? So we got two, Pepsi and Microsoft. Isn't this right? So let me give you some. So there are 9 Asians as CEOs of Fortune 500 companies in the United States, right? So that means, of those 9, only 1 is East Asian. The other 8 are all South Asian guys and gals. Let me give you another fact. The other fact that's very interesting to me is STEM PhD candidates in the United States today. Does everyone know what STEM is, right? Science, technology, engineering, and math. How many of you guys are in STEM studies? 3, 4, you're in 6, right? What are you studying?
Actuarial science.
Okay, actuarials, okay, yeah.
Molecular biology, computer science.
What kind of science?
Computer science.
Computer science. So let me give you some stats here. I think it's interesting. Of the graduate students in the United States that are electrical engineering grad students, 70% of them are non-US students, foreign students. 63% are non-foreign students in computer science departments. 60% are industrial engineering students. The far majority of our STEM students in the United States in PhD master programs are non-US students. But we have 9 Asian American CEOs. Doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Here we are doing really, really well, right? I think that's good evidence, right? That we are smart, we're doing well, and we're getting into very good schools and doing really good studies. STEM, the president talks about STEM all the time. The governor talks about STEM all the time. These are really good disciplines. In fact, if you look at the 8 South Asian CEOs, I think all of their resumes look very similar. They all have gone to what I would call the MIT of India. And then after they graduate from that, they come to the United States, work for a company, and then get an MBA from a top 5 to top 10 business school. Harvard, MIT, Stanford, Berkeley. So what does this all mean, right? So there has to be some disconnect from our doing very well in school, but not making the C-level office in corporate America, right? We enter the job place as very highly educated, excellent, but why are we not becoming C-level executives? So there's no question we are smart. The people that we're sending to these schools are smart people. But is smarts all what it takes? What does it take?
Connection.
Absolutely. Connections, ambitions. It takes networks. So, they taught, like, I remember when I started school in the 80s, and there was lots, like, people would talk about, oh, you know, the partners go and play golf. The partners go go drink after work. And so I remember I got a job my junior year in college, and between my junior and senior year in college in Washington, D.C., I worked for a civil rights organization, Asian American civil rights organization, and the executive director of the organization took me to lunch, and she asked me, "Well, what are you reading, Jeff?" And I was reading, like, "Oh, I'm reading this journal. I'm doing, you know, I'm reading Time magazine." And she was like critical of me. I was like, I'm reading good stuff, right? She said, "Oh, that's good, fine, you can read that. But you know what? You also have to read People magazine. You also have to read Sports Illustrated. You also have to, you know, like, read everything in the newspaper, from, you know, from the business section to the national section to the world section, you know, to the living arts section. You have to be well-rounded, because what is it all about? How do we connect as human beings with each other? In conversation. And you have to be prepared to have conversation about any array of things, right? So you're living here in Massachusetts, whether you're male or you're female, someone might ask you, "Oh, do you see the Patriots score this weekend?" And you're like, "Who are the Patriots?" Right? You're not going to be in that conversation for very long. Someone could say, "Oh, I just ate at this wonderful restaurant on Newbury Street." And you're like, "Where's Newbury Street?" Obviously, you all know it, but you need to know things from good restaurant reviews to how did the Patriots do this weekend to, you know, who is I'm trying to think of what's her name. One of the pop stars is dating. What's her name? Taylor Swift. Right? When I was 19, 20 years old, the pop star of the time, I'd be like, "What?" But you need to know these things, because you never know when the manager, the partner, the coworker, or anyone, when you're in these meetings, because I'm in these meetings all the time, most of the time we're not always talking about business. And you have to be nimble enough to talk about a range of subjects. They may want to talk about what's in the Wall Street Journal and about stock derivatives, but they also may want to talk about Taylor Swift's dating life, right? Now, I've had conversations about architecture with people, to restaurant reviews, to, you know, pop star lives. And on my reading list every day, I truly have, you know, I don't, like, I look at everything, because you just have to be aware, because you have to be nimble. Now, it is hard. It is hard to connect and network with people, right? You go into a room, there's nobody you know, and you're like, "Why do they want to talk to me? I'm nobody. I'm a student. I'm a first year out of business school or law school or, you know, engineering school. Why do they want to talk to me?" You know, it is hard to make those first initial steps. When I did it, I often went with a friend, and I think what we would say to each other, we would be very good about encouraging each other. We need to get business cards. We need to meet people. And so if you go with somebody, sometimes that's a great way of encouragement. And at least, you know, you're with that person too there, and you can talk to them a little bit. And it's sometimes easier as the two of you go to introduce yourself to somebody. Also, do research. Before you go to an event, before you're going to meet somebody, you know, I do lots of research. I think about, oh, who's going to be at this event, and I do read their bios. I do a little more research. You know, you're the one that said, "Oh, let me Google the population of Vietnamese Americans." Well, you can Google almost every person in the United States, and you can find their LinkedIn. You can find their corporate bio. You can find, you know, they just ran a 10K race last weekend in Wellesley, right? There are so many things you can find about people, and just do that. So I would do that before I go to some of these events. So I'd have a little Rolodex in my head of like, oh, I'm going to see this person. And you know, the first time is hard, and the second time you kind of start seeing the same people, and you continue to have conversation, and you know, you make attempts to say, oh, let's go and have a cup of coffee. I'd love to, you know, learn more about you and hear about your career, and just learn about, you know, things. So we all face discrimination, right? The facts are clear that we are facing discrimination because we're doing really well getting into graduate schools, studying the things that we're supposed to study, but we're not getting to C-level jobs. My dad, who's a dentist, has a number of good friends. So I grew up in Silicon Valley. Everyone knows where Silicon Valley is. We were lots of Vietnamese Americans. I was very exposed to Vietnamese Americans when I was growing up, which was great, right? And California is a great place to grow up because there's so many Asians that are actually a nice spectrum of Asians, not just Chinese, not just Japanese, there's Vietnamese, there's Thai people there. It's really wonderful, and obviously lots of South Asians as well. So I remember my dad was talking to a friend of his in the Bay Area, so lots of his friends, you know, surprise, are engineers in Silicon Valley, right, growing up. And one of his friends actually got a C-level job at one of the engineering companies. And what was interesting was that there's lots of Chinese engineers, or lots of Asian Americans, but they would never speak up in meetings. They would never want to make presentations. Yes, I think language is a barrier and can be a barrier, but we all know the Caucasian students are trained to make presentations. They are forward about it and want to do it. It's interesting. So my sons go to, you know, different schools, and obviously they have a range of friends, and dads do different things. One of their friends, the dad is a PhD in chemistry. He works for a pharmaceutical around here. He's on a team of about 10 10 chemists. They're all PhD chemists, and they work for pharmaceuticals, as I said. 8 of those chemists are from China, and 2 of the chemists are American, Caucasians. And he said something really funny to me. Maybe I shouldn't record it, but what he said was, we do not let the Caucasian engineers do any of the experiments. We do not trust them. We don't think they're very good trained. So the Chinese engineer or the Chinese chemists do all the experiments. They say, however, we let the American chemists do the presentations. Failure, right? Because then everyone thinks that they are the ones that come up with the big ideas. You need to be comfortable and make presentations in front of people, because that's what leaders do. I'm asked to speak all the time. You know, I speak on behalf of my clients. I speak at, you know, different events. You know, I think it's one of the most important tools that you have is your voice. And we're going to talk about voice a lot today. And I think one sure way of being a leader is being someone that speaks up and makes presentations. And, you know, it's hard. I remember the first time I made a presentation, I failed at it. I was so unorganized. I had lots of ideas, but I had no idea how to make a good presentation. So failure is okay if you know and can recognize the mistakes that you made. So when you, even in your classes, you need to make presentations for your other classmates because they see it, right? And they just like, oh, I remember when John or Jane made that presentation. We want them to join us in our new company that we're building because they can explain a very complex piece of engineering in a very clear way. You know, I'm sure you all have been sitting in class and heard someone just natter about a complex piece of engineering, and it doesn't persuade anyone about it, right? What you have to do is think about, how do I get non-engineers, how do I get non-scientists, non-lawyers to understand topics? So I often go to a place called the FCC, which you all know. I often talk to non-lawyers about legal matters there. The commissioners there are not necessarily lawyers, so I also, not to say I dumb down, I'm not dumbing down anything. I need to understand sort of the major points and be able to summarize them, and not in a legalese way, but in a way that's very understandable. You know, they may be economists, they may be engineers there may be a whole range of people there. If you need to explain complex ideas in a way that people understand. Now, what's difficult for all of you is, how many of you were native English speakers? Who here spoke English as their first language? Nobody, right? Neither did I. In my household, I spoke Chinese. That was the first language I learned. It's hard. It's not natural to speak in English and make presentations. But you all can do it. It takes practice. It takes time. But if you want to be successful, that is what you do.
I'm sure that many of you here would like to ask you questions, so please feel free to ask questions.
Yeah, well, my question is a little bit too specific about the presentation thing. So suppose that I'm working in a class project
Yes.
with everyone else in the group, and I usually if we are in the team, the one who are best at that task will do the task. So my English is not as good as my Caucasian friends, and usually I just let them to do the presentation thing.
And so what happens? No one knows what you've done. Everyone, like, so go ahead, ask your question.
So do you think that I should like sacrifice a little bit of my, the presentation for my profit to, make me outstanding in the classroom, or just go with the usually teamwork?
So what do you think I'm going to say? Well, you can answer the question yourself. What should you do?
I don't really know, seriously. Like, usually.
So let me give you a story. So when I graduated from college in 1988, I was actually a photographer. I was a professional photographer for 7 years until 1995 when I went to law school. And so when I graduated from law school, I had a number of different offers. But the offer I took was to become an appellate attorney for the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office. So appellate attorneys do lots and lots and lots of writing. You write these large 50-page appeals to the appeals court, to the Supreme Judicial Court, lots and lots of writing. How much writing did I do as a photographer?
A little bit.
Zero. Right? I was a photographer. I took pictures, I developed pictures, I printed pictures, I did no writing. I knew I was weak as a writer. I took a job that forced me to do something I was uncomfortable doing. Because that was the only way I knew how I would be forced to be better at it. What we often do, so my sons do this all the time. So when homework starts, they do their favorite subject and then leave the subject they don't like for last. Right? Because they don't want to spend time on it. Are you ever going to improve in the subject or the thing that you dislike if you're going to leave it for last? No, right? You're not going to improve. You need to embrace your weaknesses. It's okay to say today you're not very good at making presentations. No one assumes you are good at it yet. But you want to do it to get better. You'll never get better if you keep on being in the background and just doing the data analysis. And they'll be like, oh, what's your name?
You can call it Rio.
Rio. So they'll say, oh, Rio's really great at data analysis. We'll just keep her in the back room and then have her do data analysis. And you'll never see a C-level job or a leadership job ever. So you'll be in the back room doing data analysis.
I also want to add
but like sometimes your class presentation is long enough, you can nationalize the raw material down to a few parts where you can take one of them rather than
Yeah, take the whole thing. Right. Yeah, and that's a good. Right. That's a really, really great point, right? It's a good. I'm also very much in favor of taking baby steps, right? It's okay to take small steps in a direction. You know, I was with when I was at the Suffolk DA's office. So not only do we write these 50-page briefs, we also go to the appeals court and make oral argument. And I remember one of my colleagues who joined the same time I joined. She would literally, her hand would shake, and she spoke. She was so nervous, and so she would come to me. How do I fix it? I'm just so nervous. Like she was just literally. Her hand would be like the paper would be in her hand, and as she was speaking, she was like shaking. Like, how convincing are you as an attorney when you're in front of the judge? Your paper is shaking, right? So she embraced that I am not very good at this, and there are all like she goes, I need to take courses on being a better public speaker. So she actually took a course on public speech, and she got better at it. And now she teaches at Suffolk Law School. She teaches legal writing at Suffolk Law. So she got she built her confidence up, and she got better at it. But I think the first piece of it is an internal investigation, which is I want to know when I'm weak at. Not to say we can be excellent in everything that we do, but we attempt to be excellent in all things. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, so just on the topic of racism, would you say that the US is one of the least racist countries in the world? Because let's say if you go to China or go to Vietnam, what the percentage of CEOs international are foreigners?
Or foreigners.
Yeah.
Non-Vietnamese.
Yes. Yeah, so I think maybe the percentage of racists in the US is a lot more smaller than I mean, like the nationalist this point of view, to people who have a point of view.
So what's your question?
Would you say that the US is the least racist countries in the world?
So I've been to a lot of countries in the world. I've never been to Vietnam. I've never been to China. I've been to Japan. I've been to Korea. I've been to all over Europe. I've been to Central America. We know that racism is not isolated here to the United States. It exists in every place in the world. I think what we have to worry about is where we live, we need to address the racism that is there. And we have to address how can we be successful in the environment that we want to have our professional career. Whether it's going to be in Vietnam or in China or in India or the United States, I think the exciting thing for all of you as students is truly a world economy today. And this idea about making presentations and speaking, you need to understand that you might have to do a presentation in Hong Kong. You may need to do a presentation in London. And you may need to do a presentation in New York City. And you have to be able to get up in front of those folks and connect with them, talk to them, and explain a complicated idea to them in a way that they all understand. So the racism that we all face, we have to embrace it. It's there. Whether it's more in Vietnam or less in the United States, it doesn't really matter. Because what it's really about is us. And how are we going to deal with it? One, we are people that don't believe in racism, and we want to make the world less racist. Two, we want to be successful ourselves. And so how do we go beyond other people's limitations and beliefs of who we are right? So we need to be there to be excellent. It's easy to say, right? But hard to execute. Because how many of you have made a presentation in class or in a job? How easy is it? How much time do you, so do you know what, do you know what Winston Churchill said that in a speech, he would spend 1 hour for every minute of a speech. 1 hour for every minute of a speech. Who? Almost all of you have raised your hand. How much time do you guys spend on presentation?
5 minutes
An
before.
hour before the event, how confident you are in that subject.
So when I would go, so I would have 10 minutes, no, 5 minutes when I was an appellate attorney. So there's actually little lights at the appeals court. There's a green light, yellow light, and a red light. You all know what those mean. The green light, you can speak. Red light, you're done. You cannot speak anymore. And you have 5 minutes to present your case. How long do you think I would spend getting ready to make my presentation before the appeals court? 5 hours? I would usually spend 2 full days preparing. Because what I felt was I need to know this case, these facts, the law better than anyone else in this courtroom. Right? I'm the expert. People are looking to me to explain this thing. Now, I understand you guys are students and you have lots of class loads and lots of, other pressures upon you. I can't imagine, you cannot spend 2 days on a, 10-minute class presentation. But you shouldn't spend an hour beforehand. Oh, you were the hour beforehand? Somebody said it. Or 5 minutes beforehand, Because the audience isn't just the teacher. The audience is actually your other classmates. Because are your other classmates also going to be in business and in law and in science? And are they going to be the ones also that potentially could hire you or ask you to join them in their new venture or their startup? And do they not want the superstars of the class in their new business? I don't think we think about that enough. Right? But Caucasian students think about this all the time. Because they've gone to prep schools, they've gone to other places where they've known each other. You want to be somebody that somebody wants. It's great to have a good SAT score. But who cares? Really? No one's asked me my SAT score for decades. I can't even remember my SAT score. Who cares? The only way we judge people is the way they speak and present themselves to others. Right? In a short conversation that we could have at a cocktail reception, to me making a presentation to a bunch of executives. We're all being judged and being assessed on our intelligence, on our ability. And one of the more difficult things to do is thinking on your feet, right? So do you guys like to do the Q&A after your presentation? You like it?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, good. Because what that shows is a good ability to absorb the question, think about it, and come with a good answer. It's a hard thing to do. Anyone else have questions? Sure.
For the presentation, if you have a topic that you're not confident in, no matter how much you read, what should you do with that? You never feel like you're ready enough to present to someone. What should you do with that?
You can always. There is, today, there is so much resource to become an informed person. I could give you any topic in the world, and if I give you 2 days, you could be an expert. Not someone that goes, 60 feet deep into the subject. But if I ask you, give us, a general understanding about, 20th century architecture, you could do it. You would read some books, you'd read some articles online, and you would have a general understanding of 20th century architecture. And that's what you're going, like, you all are going to be asked to make presentations about things that you're not perfectly expert at. You should embrace it and say yes. Any other questions? I didn't even realize we were going to talk so much about presentations.
So I have two questions. The first one is you talked about how Asians really well school and very smart, but none of them can make it to the top of the field. And
Or that's the facts. That's
Yeah.
what we know.
Yeah.
They haven't made it to the top.
Yeah.
But you're going to change it all.
one, I hope so. But one of the reasons you point out is many Asians shy away from expressing themselves in front of public.
Yeah.
And except for the fact that many of us are foreign and English is as our first language, is not the language that we're most comfortable with.
Right.
There are other things that I think come from the culture. What is it from the East Asian culture that make a lot of Asians not really expressive and shy away from
So why don't we want to stand out and be leaders? I struggle with that a lot, right? There's lots in my culture that says for me to not stand out so much, to be part of a group, to work with a group, because there's, we come from places where being part of the group and being part of the community is so crucial for success, right? I like to talk about that you can use those same tools to still stand out. Right? You don't have to do it exactly the way your Caucasian colleagues do it. You can be successful keeping with your values and with your way of thinking. But that doesn't mean you should shy away from opportunity. And so leadership should not necessarily always be about me, right? Those are the worst leaders, right? The leaders that are all about themselves. I think there's a lot of good modeling and values that the Asians and East Asians can provide to corporate America, to the university, to other arenas. Because, I remember in a job interview once, I said that the only way we can figure out good change is through collaboration. Single-minded change rubs everyone the wrong way. And when we can collaborate and do change, where we hear and listen to others, we actually are probably better at making that change. So, yes, there are things that you may think hold you back, but I would reverse it and say these are things that actually can make you even better leader than the leaders that already exist out there. And I think you should embrace the values that you were brought up on. You should not shed those values, but say those values actually make me a better leader than most people are. Because these are the values that actually I know work. Because I've seen it work in my country, I've seen it work in my community. So I need to share with people that this is the value system that you should be using in your business, in your university, in your law firm. It's hard, but you need to sort of use those tools. Be genuine to yourself and your values.
We've been talking about, I think there's been a lot of conversation about social bubbles, and it makes it about like, we're living like a very liberal era, so, we just kind of, about out of any other, very some kind of like conceptual and backward areas. So do you think that we should kind of like get out of our bubbles to kind of like have more?
Perfect, great questions. I love that question. I remember a Harvard law student was meeting with me, a great kid. He's now an associate 1,000-person law firm in Silicon Valley. He was at Harvard, and I said, "Who do you sit with at lunch?" What do you think he said? All the other Chinese kids. Right? It's comfortable. I sit with all the other Chinese kids. I said, "Really? You just sit with the other Chinese kids. You can't just sit with your own, right? You got to do exactly what you talked about. You got to get out of your social bubble. It's hard, right? But how do you do it? It's easy for you guys to stay together because you're international students. There's a common language, a common culture. But you need people to know that you're smart, that you have lots to contribute, and you need to be participants in other clubs. So every one of you have different interests. Maybe some of you like to play tennis. Some of you might like to, bake. Some of you may like to, jog. Some of you may like to, you all have different interests, and the world has a bunch of different interests, and you need to just join other organizations that do these other things, because you're going to meet a mix of people in those organizations. And you're going to meet at lunchtime. So at lunch, your Caucasian students are sitting together. Bring your tray, sit with them. You know what? Why not? How else? How else are you or they going to know each other? And if you do what I said, read People magazine, read Sports Illustrated, read the Wall Street Journal, you can insert yourself to any conversation. So if they're all talking about the Patriots, they're like, "Oh yeah, I watched the Patriots game last night. That was a great game. Tom Brady did blah, blah, blah. Gronkowski did this and that," right? You would surprise them, right? The international kid from Vietnam knows about the Patriots. But that's what you all, this is not about gender, right? The females and males, you all, I read fashion magazine because I've actually had to be in conversation with female executives and have to talk about fashion, right? It's a good topic to have, right? I understand what's happening. I read W magazine, so I have some understanding of what's going on in the fashion world. It's not like I do it every day. Once a month I'll flip through it. I'll understand sort of generally what the trend is happening. So if someone talks about it, I can "Oh yeah, I just saw this interesting spread," and they'll be like, "You read W?" I'm like, "Yeah, I read W." Right? Don't you want someone to be surprised, if they said, "Yeah, you read the sporting news every month," right? You care. It shows that you have broad sense of interest. And that's what we all should have, right? We shouldn't just worry about one little area of our lives. And it's, by reading W or by reading sporting news or Sports Illustrated or Architectural Digest, you're exposed to new things. We are curious people, and we want to know more. And I know we're all very busy, but 1 hour less of reality TV can do us all. Yeah, he had a question, right? Did you? Or who? Someone else. You've asked a question already. That's why I went. No one else have a question? You? Oh, okay, then you can ask again.
Because my question is kind of related to
Okay,
his question.
please. Yeah.
So,
By the way, how long do we have?
We have, we're good. We're 40 more minutes.
Okay, sorry.
so talking about the social bubble, let's say I voted for Hillary. I couldn't vote, but
Yeah, let's say you
I
voted, right. I understand. We're not going to report any voter fraud. So this is you're a Hillary supporter.
I
You can be-
prefer Hillary, not a Hillary supporter.
Like that?
I prefer Hillary.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a really
you prefer Hillary. Yes.
okay. And I'm deeply disagree. I deeply disagree with people who supported Trump. But when I read what they say, from the guy from Humans of New York, they went to the county who voted 90%. The population of the county voted for Trump.
Yeah.
Or something. And I read the the feeling, the opinion, I feel that they're just like me. They have their own interests, their own worries about their lives, and I understand their logic. So I don't agree. Sorry, I don't agree with them, but I understand their logic. So how can we, maybe um, how how should we treat them, express our feelings to them, but still, I don't know, like how can we?
So I
Like-
don't want to be, do you know the expression, I don't want to be Pollyannish about this. There is significant disagreement about this country and where it's going. I had a very interesting conversation yesterday. So as you probably all know, I'm a registered Democrat, I work in Democratic administrations. I'm very liberal and I'm very much a strong leader. At the FCC right now, because the president has a point, there's 5 commissioners, 3 Democrat and 2 Republican. It was interesting. Yesterday, I got 2 calls from both of the Republican commissioners' staffers. One of them wanted to talk to me. One of the Republican commissioners is coming to New Hampshire. I'm having dinner with him and with some other people. They wanted to have a conversation about what should he talk about. And what I said to them was, there's a lot of common ground. There's a lot of things that there's shared values on, and we should talk about the things that we have shared values on. I think it's always best to come into conversation with things that we have in common with, right? When you go see your friends, you don't start about here's the things that I don't like about you, or here's the things I disagree with you about, right? You go to your friends and talk about, oh, I know you love Chinese food, let's all go and have Chinese food. So we always come together when there is some common ground. So I actually, again, I don't want to be Pollyannish about the strong disagreements between the Republicans and Donald Trump and the Democrats and Hillary Clinton. There is real strong disagreement. But what I can start today with, we respect the results of the election and respect the office of the president. We know he won. We know it's going to be his agenda, but we can find common ground about some of the things that they're doing. So that's why I talked about the 2. So one, the first conversation I had yesterday was about sort of what are the things that D's and R's are agreeing on in telecom policy. And then that was similar to my second conversation with the other Republican commissioner staffer. Any other questions before we end? Right, we have about 5 minutes left. So how much long? You tell me.
It's actually 14. So
Yeah.
do you want to go to 4:30?
What I'm not boring all of them. I don't need to talk anymore. Or whatever you guys want me to do. I'm scheduled to be here. Yeah.
I have a question that's really about corporate America. It's like I talked to a guy who
To what?
corporate America
Corporate America. Yes.
and the politics. Like I talked to a really successful portfolio manager, and he was talking about how as agents, a lot of us pay attention a lot to the work we do, and we hope that our work will shine through and show who we are. But in reality, it's not always true that there are a lot of politics. How to get to know the senior managers, how to show off, kind of, not show off to the way that they know we are showing off, but play with the game. Besides,
Sure.
like, being well-rounded, being, like, know about different things.
So self-promotion.
Yes.
How do we self-promote? Oh, that's a really hard topic because it gets to so many of the values I was taught as a young person, and even that I try to teach my sons today, right? Self-promotion. So how do I do it? I sometimes just push myself to do it, right? Send an email to the managers when something you've done is a success. Because that's what the white guys do. Right? We know that's what they do. Because it's ingrained in them to do it. I think you have to push yourself out of some comfort zones, and it's okay. And as I said to you, about, or you asked a question about, what was it you? I can't remember. About sort of our own value systems and embrace our own values. I still believe that strongly. But there's a way to be respectful about self-promotion, right? I'm sure in class, you hate the kids that are always raising their hand and think they have the answer, but really don't have the right answer, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't that drive you crazy?
Yeah.
And you're like, I know how to do this, but why not?
It's gonna be cool that way. No, I'm joking.
Right, that's what many students say. So I think, pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. When you do have the answer, when you do something successful, let others know about it, right? Share. It's okay to share in success. Now, there's right ways and wrong ways to do it, and you really have to be sensitive to culture. Culture is like probably the hardest thing to learn. So, think of Westerners coming into your city, your town, your community, and how ill-fitting they are, right? Because they're not sensitive to culture. It takes a lot to be observant and understand what the cultural norms are. Have you found yourself not quite understanding the cultural norms? It can be very, like, every place, a workplace, a university, a community, all has its own unique cultural norms, and it takes a lot of listening and observing to understand what those cultural norms are, and to see how others are doing it. What ultimately is the worst thing that can happen? You make some mistakes, right? And what you worry about, how do those mistakes make you look? But if you're doing mostly everything right, you'll be okay. I think the other thing we haven't talked about is mentorship. We all need someone to help us guide us through life. When we're young, we have our mom and dad, our grandparents, our aunts and uncles, our older cousins, to help us understand what the world is like. It doesn't end when you become 21. You still need people to show you what the world is like. And it's okay, you need to have people where you can have safe conversations and ask them, I really want to let others know about this project I'm doing. What do you think is a perfect way for me to share? Right? It's okay to ask. I think no one would be offended by you saying that. And they'd be like, oh, you should just send an email to our division. Or you should send an email to the class. But it's okay, like, having conversation. And just say, I don't know. So, having mentors and having people that you're close to have these conversations. Now, that's a whole nother subject of, like, the other thing I hear is like, oh, it's great to have a mentor, but I can't find anyone that wants to mentor me or care about me, to care about how I'm doing. Well, one reason maybe is that you're not reaching out to enough people. There's always someone that cares about you and about your success. And it cannot be a one-way street of you're waiting for someone to reach out to you. You have to reach out. And just because you reach out and this person doesn't want to help you, there are others. You just have to continue to reach out and find that good match. Right? Yes.
I'm currently working on a project that strengthens the connection between the American business and the Vietnamese business. Do you think the new cabinet will affect the new the countries?
I don't know enough about U.S.-Vietnamese relations to say that. But the New York Times was reporting yesterday about how President-elect Trump has made all these phone calls not using the typical, protocol of State Department, and he's offending people left and right. So I think, and what we hear is in the sort of the professional State Department staff, then have to make phone calls to try to fix the problem. It's embarrassing, right? It's a little embarrassing that this has happened. In fact, the White House called the Trump team and said, hey, slow down. We're here to help you guys. And, I think this is really great on President Obama's side. Like, I want, President Obama has said, I want President Trump to be successful. And I'm willing to use my staff and my personnel to be helpful. There's no agenda here other than I want to be helpful. I think what you could, there are going to be bumps in the road because, what we understand about President-elect Trump is that he's not a professional politician, and he comes from a world where his brashness is actually well sort of embraced and recognized. But in government, that brashness isn't something there is a much more subtle dance that occurs, especially in interactions between two international companies, right? People all are reading, talk about culture and subtlety, so what you could be good at is helping others understand what is happening, right? That the things that are a little bit bumpy, to say, is that really a problem? Or is that really what the US is trying to do? Or is it really, again, trying to find a common ground so you can get a deal done? Yeah. Okay. I think any other questions?
Last question.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so you talk about for Asian people, they all wear in their bubbles and everything, but also I think that sometimes they're scared of being a failure. They're scared to make a mistake and become a failure. So if you make a mistake, how you get up from that? Because people always say you have to try even if you fail, but if you're scared of failing, how you get up from that and start from the beginning?
Ask the question one more time so I make sure I understand.
Okay. So if you're so afraid to be a failure,
Okay, yes.
how you get over that?
This is a good discussion about mistakes, right? I think mistakes happen, and I think you have to embrace the idea that you will make mistakes. And I think, we sometimes live in a culture where we believe there should be no mistakes, and we have to be mistake-free. Now, of course, it's easy to say oh, it's okay to make a mistake. But when, you've done it and you feel bad, right? It makes you feel bad and you feel like I should have done better. So the first thing is, preparation. How can you prepare so when you're in that moment to make a decision or to talk, that you're not going to make that mistake? So one is to minimize the possibility of a mistake is preparation, right? So if you're going to make a presentation, be prepared, be over-prepared. If you think you're ready, we'll spend more time to be even more ready. Okay? Number two, I think when you make the mistake, to analyze why you made the mistake. Why was it? Is it because you didn't do enough research? Is it because you spoke without thinking? Is it a mistake that was just inadvertent? So nothing really was out of your control. So I think the other piece of it is thinking to analyze why you made the mistake and to make sure the mistake that you made, you understand it. And I think that makes it you can say, okay, I understand why I made this mistake. I can fix it. Because there's almost no mistake that you can't fix, right? You can fix all mistakes at some, you may not be able to fix it and make the current outcome better, but you can fix it in the sense that next time you're presented in this situation, you can do better. Now, your other worry is, because I'm so worried about mistake, I'm not going to take risks. this is maybe something else. How much risk do you take? There are some people just hardwired to take a lot of risk. But I would venture to say that all of you have taken some risk. You left Vietnam, you left Southeast Asia, and you are here. Was that easy to do? No, right? If you are not a risk taker, you would stay at home. And you would just studied at home. And you would have just done what your friends and cousins are all doing back at home. Coming here was risk. And I think that's the other thing that you should take stock of is what have I done to get myself here? A friend of mine would say to me, who's also a commissioner, he said, you know what, you should some days just sit back and recognize your accomplishments and recognize what you have done. It's okay to recognize what you've done because it gives you confidence and strength to then act. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have this question about mentorship. You're talking about it's very important to find mentors.
Yeah.
And one thing that I find it's difficult to maintain the mentorship relationship. I think that people talk a lot about the importance of following up. So could you talk a little more about that?
So one of my mentors I've known since probably 1991. What's it, 2016? That's 21. Bad at that. But I'll get better. I'll do more problems tonight. I'll do my son's homework. Mentorship, friendship, relationship is something that we all have to put some investment in. If we just let it sit, it doesn't work. And also, you have to think about, you can't just be taking, right? And you think, well, what can I give? I'm a student, and this person is establishing their career, they're doing something. I have a number of young people that I interact with. There's lots of things that they give about. They write me a nice note to show appreciation. It could be a handwritten note rather than just an email. I think making genuine gestures of appreciation is always, always welcome. And, really we have to look at our own sort of personal relationships and learn from those about how do we, a mentorship relationship is like any relationship, right? You have to invest and do things that make it work. You can't just hope this person is going to invest time in you, right? Because they're busy people. Usually, if this mentor is worth anything, she or he is a busy person and has job demands, has other demands, and you're just one of maybe many voices that are asking for help. But you can stand out in that way of being more than just asking for help.
I think also by the fact that you're moving or you achieve what you wanted, it's some sort of giving back to the person who helped you. They feel like they are helpful.
Oh, that's a really good insight. I like that because people love to see success.
And then that success, you helped that person accomplish.
Yes, exactly. I love that. That's great. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else?
Thank you. So I think if nobody has any questions, then thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was so nice.
You have given us some much needed advice, an array of help. And I really want to thank everybody for your excellent participation today. And please join me in thanking Jeff for his time, his wisdom.
Thank you for having me.
We from the association have a small
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Do you want to take a picture together?
Oh, wherever you want me to do.
I think you just stay
Stay
there.
right here?
Yeah.